seek out opportunities to meet people in ways that suit you. And if they don't exist, make them.
Hey, and welcome to Existential Threads. In the last episode, we discovered that meaningful relationships are a major overlooked factor that really impacts our long-term health and well-being. So in this episode, I'd like to delve into what we can do to gain more control over this elusive aspect of our lives that I think we tend to take for granted. And it doesn't only apply to our personal lives, by the way, but also to our professional lives. If you tend to be introverted like me, you might feel the same way, like certain jobs and work relationships and even whole industries feel out of reach. But according to my guest today, Tom Norman, it's not true. Introversion can be a real asset in the workplace. And most importantly, we can be proactive about it. So, Tom is the founder of the Introvert Social Club, which is a really wonderful and popular community that exists online and also locally right now in Spain, but it may expand soon. And his intention was to create those opportunities for people to have deeper and more thoughtful interactions than are usually on offer. I found this conversation and his insights really valuable. I really hope you do too. So, you say one of the most positive parts of being an introvert for me is the depth of my thoughts and how profoundly I experience the world. And I thought, like, I'm not sure it would make necessarily sense to, let's say, an extrovert, that there is a correlation there between being an introvert and having maybe a more profound internal experience. So I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, sure. It sounds really good. I don't even remember. It must have been like my consciousness putting that out in the first place. That quote. But no, for me, it's the case of like, for example, when I'm witnessing a sunset, if I'm doing that alone, for example, often there's a lot more richness to the experience. And I'm not sure exactly why. I'm not sure if it's because I can contemplate more or because, the inner monologue can kind of go even a bit deeper or something. But I feel like there's such a rich inner world in me. And, that also means that, this is a sunset, a natural experience. But even in life in general, I feel like I think a lot, sometimes bad, sometimes good. But I think that depth of thinking, that kind of richness of thinking is a really beautiful experience. I wouldn't want to leave that. I wouldn't want to drop that. But I don't know if that answered the question. But yeah, that's kind of the richness, the depth. I have this kind of real depth of experiencing things, particularly if I'm alone. And I feel like sometimes if I'm with other people, I can really enjoy a situation, but I don't experience it necessarily as profoundly as if I'm alone to experience something.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think like I'm still like there's a part of me that so much wants to be a different kind of person. So I always kind of I regret not, having more fun, living life more fully, like which in how it is advertised in our culture today is like doing things and being with people and yes, and I feel like some of the most satisfying moments in my life have been just alone. And I sometimes ask myself if I'm just like, is it a problem? Or like why is that, like, am I gonna regret in I don't know how many years that I didn't have but more fun?
Yeah. That's funny you mentioned fun actually, because this is something I'm trying to get better at. Like, let's say I'm quite serious by nature and quite deep by nature. My idea of fun typically is going and talking about something deep for an hour, right? But that's not necessarily fun in the grand scheme of things. And I am, trying to challenge myself to be more fun, to have more fun, to kind of be a bit more jokey and playful. And I don't know, it's going okay. In certain situations, if I feel quite comfortable, I'm okay to be jokey and throw out random one-liners or whatever. But I think it's definitely, I hold myself back with new people or big groups. But I'm trying to be more fun, let's say.
Yeah, this leads me to, the whole being an introvert. It's they say it's up to 40% of the population. Is that more or less the number you have in mind, or?
I think so. Like I'd say 40 to 50%. I think it is, and again, it's like what do you call it? It's a spectrum too, right? So somewhere in between, there's like probably more ambiverts where you can be a bit of both depending on the way you feel or the situation or whatever.
Yes, I definitely feel it's a spectrum because like it surprises me that it's like that many people, and maybe like I also have a sense that we're a more heterogenic group, so every person kind of expresses their introversion in a different way.
Mhm.
Um, what is the introvert definition that you resonate with?
For me, I would say there's a few layers to it. Um, I think the first and foremost is, despite, I do enjoy company, particularly if the conversations are deeper, the groups are smaller. But I also do need my time to recharge. And just for example, one of my favorite parts of the day is the first kind of hour when I get up and I kind of by myself, I have my own coffee, and it's just like this real downtime before the day actually comes to life. And it's probably one of my most cherished experiences and rituals. So this is one of those things where I need this like alone time to really recharge. But I think there is more to it than that. Like I mentioned, the richness of the depth of thinking too. I think that is partly for me what introversion can be, for example. And maybe that's why I was just saying to somebody yesterday. Inside, everything is a lot deeper and a lot more flowy. And I think sometimes it's expressing that externally where I start to feel the rigidness. And maybe that's what it's like to be an introvert. Like inside, it's really rich and it's easy and it's flowing. But trying to express that with others, you lose something. It becomes more rigid. It changes state almost. And that could be part of it too. I'm not sure if this is introversion or just me in general, but I think the other part of my personality, which I think is somewhat linked, is empathy. I think there's a very rich empathy there, perhaps linked to the amount of thinking going on. I'm like really trying to understand you and your vibe and stuff. So I think that's the other layer to this introversion that I've got, is like the empathy side of things as well.
I feel the same way. I would say I almost feel like I can't be fully myself when I'm with others. And what is ourselves? Like it's maybe it doesn't even exist outside of a relationship with something, it's almost like a matter of authenticity. It is painful to witness myself, like you say, like navigating that friction of trying to express your inner world outwardly, and like there is some discomfort because it feels like it's not fully who I am.
Yeah, I get that. And something you just mentioned, I really resonate with it because for much of my life, I preferred one-on-one groups first of all. So one-on-one, conversations first of all. So a lot of my friendships were designed like that. I didn't have necessarily groups. I had lots of one-on-ones. And like you said, I found myself kind of adapting to each one and becoming what the situation needed. And on the one hand, that was great. I had all these friends and most of the time enjoyed it. But it caused two problems, I think. On the one hand, I was a people pleaser. So actually, a lot of the time, I was maybe going out of my way to kind of be what somebody else needed rather than thinking, oh, who do I want to be? So it's not necessarily linked to introversion, but I think it can be. So as a people pleaser, I'm becoming, what people wanted, essentially. And the other thing I remember being very strange, when I first started dating my girlfriend, I remember almost being nervous to meet people because I was like, oh, the person that I am with this person might be different from the person I am with my girlfriend with this person. And like, how is that vibe going to be now? Like, I remember being quite nervous in the beginning because, yeah, I wasn't sure how it was going to be. And it obviously turned out okay. And it's, some, friendships just change anyway. But yeah, I completely relate to that kind of slight changing with every person. And you could ask like, are you being authentic? And what is authenticity? What is the real me behind all this? But no, I definitely experienced that kind of change. And for me, it's back to the empathy thing too. Like it's not necessarily me changing. It's just the way I approach the situation, the questions I'm asking, the answers I'm giving. It's all kind of changing based on what that person might need or resonate best with. But yes, it's definitely part of my life too.
I never thought about it this way. I definitely feel the same need to like people please when I feel like I'm in that kind of, especially in a situation where, as you say, like you have two people who know you in different ways, and you're like, you feel, yeah, but maybe empathy is part of it. You're very attuned to people's needs. There is the definition that most people kind of know today and accept today, which is it just takes more energy to be with people than without. You need to recharge, and then where introverts like are drained by being with people, extroverts are actually energized by being with people. Does that resonate with your experience as well?
I would say so. I'm definitely, drained and have a limited social energy. And, I can be incredibly extroverted at times, particularly in certain situations, particularly, and maybe we'll come on to it, like I host these events, right? So when you're the organizer of an event, you have a certain role to play. And quite often I do have this more charisma, I guess, in the events. But it's limited. And, with a lot of socializing, my batteries can be completely drained, and I struggle to chat with anyone. Even like my partner, for example, I struggle to sometimes say anything because I'm so drained.
Mm.
And yeah, I can't imagine. And also, just the other thing wanted to say is when it comes to processing stuff, some extroverts can process stuff whilst they're talking about it. Like they're talking and they're processing it as they go. Whereas I think first, then process, and then like describe second. And in fact, if I'm trying to process and think at the same time, I struggle with it a lot. So I think that's the other part of this equation, which extroverts can do quite well by the looks of things, and I really struggle with.
Do you sometimes feel misunderstood by people? Like they perceive a completely different persona of you than you are?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the most common things I would feel on a regular basis. Like, mm, it comes back to a little bit of what I said earlier. Like, inside, things make a lot of sense to me. The moment, like, it comes out of my mouth and into the world, it rarely is the shape and form it was inside. So as a result, most interactions I have, it's not quite as fluid as it was inside of my mind, right? And that does, with kind of your partner, with your friends, you start to learn the way you speak with them. But in general, the world at large, I definitely feel kind of misunderstood. And like I regularly come away from things thinking, oh, that wasn't the way I wanted to express it. Like that wasn't how it is in my mind. Um, and I would say, this has and does impact me making friendships too, because I'm looking for the friendships where I feel more understood. I'm looking for the friendships where we reach a level of connection where it does feel like we kind of get each other. And I don't know if I'm there or if I'm, maybe what I'm chasing doesn't exist. Maybe it's this thing which is, esoteric and I will never reach it. But that is definitely what I'm searching for is this level of, yeah, being understood and level of belonging. And I'm not sure if I have found that yet or if I ever will find it. Maybe this is the level of being understood that we can think to achieve as a human being, and maybe I've reached it and I'm craving for something else, which is possible too.
Yes, it's like it's almost like not on the level of words. Sometimes you just meet people you feel they get you, and it's so comforting. Like for me, it's like it's always surprising that sometimes connections happen very fast when you it's just like on I don't know on the molecular level with someone who has similar sensibilities. I
Mm.
definitely feel like in my life I heard a lot that like I don't know if today I would hear the same, but definitely throughout my life people perceive me as spacey and calm, and I'm just the opposite of spacey and calm. Like usually there's a lot of processing going on inside, and it's just like that frustrating feeling of there is so much happening within that somehow doesn't translate to the real world and and some people are not sensitive to that, so it seems to them like there is nothing.
Absolutely. And I think this is what I've thought is that maybe that's one of the reasons that we get so tired from social situations because an extrovert doesn't have this. At least, again, I can't speak for extroverts because I've never experienced it, but from my understanding, extroverts don't have as much of a rich in a monologue, a rich filtering, let's say, and a processing. We are constantly kind of processing, taking in data, thinking about what we're saying, making sense of everything. Like there's so much work going on there that of course we're tired socially and we retreat to our kind of lives outside of socializing. Whereas maybe an extrovert, if there's less of this level of kind of processing, and that's not meant as a bad thing. It's just less of what we just described. Maybe that's why it's less taxing. That's why it's easier as an extrovert to kind of keep socializing, whereas we need to retreat to our solitude again.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like my husband is a great example. Like I live with him, so I really know there's like it's quiet inside. It's pretty quiet. He can be stressed out about something very, practical, but it's like there's no, yeah, general noise. We'll get more into that kind of stuff, but I wanted to hear about the Introvert Social Club and how it came about. Like I just went to one of your meetups and it was great, and I stayed in the and I continue going. But like, can you tell me how the idea came up and why you put this community together?
Sure. I mean, I arrived in Valencia almost 3 years ago, like 3 years ago in September. And I remember, we arrived not knowing many people. I had a few people here and there that I knew, but not many. And so, one of my first priorities was to meet people, to build my circle, to find my crowd. And I remember going to several language exchanges. I remember going to the occasional networking event. I remember going to co-working spaces and going to their networking events. And I remember always feeling kind of disappointed and somewhat overwhelmed. And in fact, typically, and I'm not sure if this is common or if this is just common to me, when I come to these big events and it's loud and it's crazy, not only do I leave disappointed, but I also leave kind of disappointed in myself. Why am I this quiet? Why am I this pathetic at socializing that I can't connect with anyone? Da 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 da. So, within about 6 months, I was kind of a bit fed up of these networking events and stuff. And I thought, oh, you know what? I'm going to throw something on Meetup and see if there's other people out there who want to meet in ways that I resonate with, which is, smaller groups, I don't know, more interesting, like more deeper conversations, let's say, quieter environments. So I threw up the group, and yeah, it was, I think, the first event or two was maybe 6 or 8 people, but very rapidly it caught on. So it really resonated with people. But it happened, very organically. And, it was one of these things where I didn't do it as a project. I did it as an experiment. I was like, oh, what are other people out there in the same boat where they want to meet people but hate most of the ways to do it? And it turns out there's a resounding yes that people are frustrated with some of the ways to meet.
Yeah, that's really good to know. And I remember feeling like just struck by I hadn't known that about myself, but just having a structure, a script to the meetup was very liberating and comforting to me. Do you have any idea? Like I don't know if it's a thing with introverts, but why I personally feel like structure is so comforting.
I think this is what it brings up something where introverts often um, we're not necessarily good at being spontaneous, especially with like other people. Let's say we like to process things first and then kind of react. Let's say, and this is one of the things. It's really important when hosting an event where introverts can feel comfortable is that they know what's coming in advance, because otherwise there's a lot of, I don't know if it's the overthinking involved. I don't know if it's just like the worrying about what's going to happen. Like without that structure, without that roadmap, if you like, it can be overwhelming. And in fact, it can put people off even coming at all if they don't know what to expect. And it's beyond just events too. Like I'll give you a personal example. I have a friend who quite often invites me out with a group of his friends. And quite often I'll need to know like exactly who's going and where we're going and what the plan is, because I'm going to not feel comfortable in certain situations based on others, right? And it's one of these things like, yeah, just trying to understand what the situation is going to be and how I'm going to be in that situation. So I think that's probably one of the reasons you like the structure to the events, because there's no, and again, spontaneity is a great thing. And I don't want it to be like, oh yeah, introverts are so plain. We don't like any spontaneity. It's not like that at all. It's more like we like to know the framework. And I'm not sure if you relate to this too, but for me especially, one of the things I struggle with in any new environment is like knowing the rules or knowing like the expected norms. And that for me is quite overwhelming. If I don't know the expected norms, I'm going to shut up and be quiet and just observe. Whereas, if the norms are laid out to you, if the rule book is laid out, if the framework is there, you feel a lot more at peace, a lot more comfortable. And I think that's what I do to attempt to do in the events. Is like, hey, this is how it works. This is what to expect. This is what we're going to do. And so far, it's been working fairly well.
So I know you started the community in Valencia, but I wonder what is your vision for such a community? Like, do you have a long-term goal or something you hope to create from that?
I mean, I see this as something which could work in other cities. I think there are a lot of people moving around and moving to new cities. And I think that's really who the target is for this project is like, if you've moved to a brand new city, as anybody, it's difficult because you've got to find your habits again. You got to build your crowd. You've got to kind of like build your connections and things. And I like to think of it like this, like let's say it might take 30 people. You've got to meet 30 people before you find that one you connect with, that person you really kind of vibe with. For an extrovert, that is significantly easier. You could go out every single day for a month, that's 30 days, and you found your person on day 30, and that's it. You found your first good friend, right? But for an introvert, if we can go out maybe once or twice a week because of our, social battery and everything, and not only that, if there are less kind of introvert friendly events out there, so less opportunities to even find places where you might meet in a environment which feels good for you, that 30 days for an extrovert could be a year and a half or 2 years or more for an introvert, and if you don't give up along the way. So really my passion here, my motivation for this project is how do we kind of make that easier for introverts? How can we reduce that number from 30 lower, and how can we kind of build, I don't know, environments, whether it's in person or online, where we make that a lot easier so that as an introvert in a new city, it doesn't take you 3.5 years and a lot of kind of bad feelings to find your crowd, but like it takes you, a few months to kind of really connect with your people. So yeah, I do hope to expand beyond Valencia. In fact, I am actively looking for hosts in different cities. I've kind of built a bit of a playbook, but a lot of it will be worked out along the way. But yeah, that's kind of the plan essentially is that, and then also just the more I learn about myself and introverts in general, looking at what other needs we have and seeing if the project can help serve those needs in some way.
I often wonder about the price we pay for being introverts in our careers, because it is really like you say, for an extrovert, they go out, they make a friend, and I often feel like maybe it's a bit harsh, but I feel like sometimes I just feel less likable because it's like there is this barrier, and like I feel like I don't have the textbook, and I don't know, I go out with my husband. He always has something appropriate to say, like, in whatever small talk. It's like he always knows how to fill these moments of awkwardness, and I don't. And what do you think? Like, do you think that? And I know things have changed. In the past, maybe introverts had a better time in those contexts, but today, are we paying a real price for being introverts in terms of our ability to get ahead and make connections with people who can actually, like, because at the end of the day it's all relationships. So what do you think about that?
I'd say there's two parts to this question. On the one hand, I would say I have experienced similar, in that I've been in the workplace in my previous job where I didn't feel like I was thriving, mostly because of the situations, mostly because most meetings were big groups with several kind of loud voices and extroverts. And despite having stuff to say, I rarely would because actually, I didn't want to fight to say something. That's one of my pet peeves is trying to fight to get a word in. Not only do I find it difficult because, like I said before, I need to process things before I say something. So I find it incredibly difficult anyway, but also I just hate the environment where you're fighting to be heard. And it's made even worse through, Zoom and everything because you've also got the what do you call it, like the gaps and pauses and everything with technology to kind of fight with as well. So yeah, I think on the one hand it is difficult to some extent as an introvert in like the workplace or in life in general, to kind of like, I wouldn't even say make connections, and that's going to be my second point because I think it's just to have your voice heard. And many situations in the workplace that you aren't for like there's a one-on-one meeting, and it's called one-on-one because it's one of the only meetings at work you really have one-on, right? The rest are much more group focused. So I think that's my biggest thing about being introvert. Is it's difficult sometimes in group situations unless the moderator, unless the leader, unless the organizer is somebody who's good at kind of helping people to talk and giving people their voices to be heard. But I would say the other side of things is while extroverts may be better at kind of like these small talks, these almost these superficial connections because they can kind of it's almost like oil. They glide with everyone, right? Whereas, maybe introverts don't find that so easy. But when we connect deeper because we go beyond just that surface oil and we kind of really kind of connect in a deeper way. So I would say, fine, maybe an extrovert can meet 50, 100, 150 connections a lot more easily than an introvert can. But at least the introvert, the 10 or 15 they meet and they make, maybe they're deeper. Maybe, there's a bit more trust there and a bit more. At least that's been how it is in my case too. Like I also struggle in certain environments to connect, and I also have some self-loathing sometimes. Like, oh, I'm an idiot. I shouldn't have said that or whatever. But I would say, in my past, in my career, the depth of relationships have probably helped, and that is probably more important at the end of the day is the depth. And I don't think that we lack from that perspective. Making deep relationship is something we're good at.
Yes, I agree. But again, I think that since perhaps people who are introverts tend to also be a more heterogenic group. Maybe that's just my imagination, but I feel like, but it's also then like meeting an introvert doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be an easy connection. But yeah, eventually when you make that connection, I feel it's very satisfying. And I just had an experience. I actually am just coming back from almost a week of being in this fellowship. It's longevity related, but it's like a biotech fellowship, and it was more kind of like a summer camp. So I prepared myself. It was 4 days of like sleeping there, eating there, doing everything with a bunch of people. And I had all kinds of conversations with people and trying to kind of hear about the career trajectories. And especially one conversation stuck with me where a guy, was trying to understand how he like gets deals done and like what's his strategy. And it was all very interesting. But the bottom line that I heard was, the biggest deals were made after I went to some event and had drinks with someone at the bar. And I'm like, damn, it's like, and I can see that he's a very easy person to get on. Like, it's just like, I can see how it can happen. Not to say that he's not very talented, I'm sure, but it definitely makes things easier. And, after a conference like that, I need like a week to recover.
Sure.
But I see that, like, for example, it's interesting. You mentioned like you lead a community. Introverts often find themselves in leadership positions or on stages, which actually there's something to say about there is solitude in those kinds of roles as well. But how does it make sense to you as a person who is an introvert that there is attraction to also those positions that are considered to be more requiring more of an extrovert spirit?
Yeah, I mean, I do think again, I think there's merits to both, right? There's like yeah, merits or what's the word I want? Like mm, kind of both extroverts and introverts can be very good and have particular skills and things that they're really good at. And so, for example, for me, I'm leading these events. I'm leading a community, let's say, and for me, that comes back down to the skill of empathy. Like I really kind of feel what the community needs, and I feel what the event needs. And that's why, despite being introverted and despite leading a group of people, I have the empathy, which really helps me to do that, right? And maybe an extrovert wouldn't necessarily, and, maybe it's not extrovert, introvert, maybe it's just skills in general, but let's say an extrovert wouldn't necessarily have that same empathy or know quite what the situation needed at a particular time. And I think it's the same in the workplace, let's say, or in leadership in general. Like you get some leaders who maybe are a lot more charismatic. Maybe they are the ones going out there to get the deals done or the salespeople, right? They go here, there, and everywhere. Where you and I are just recovering from the one thing. They've done six more things since then. So these are the people where I wouldn't thrive whatsoever at this. But in the same way, there might be extrovert leaders who are a lot more, we said about having rich or deeper inner worlds potentially. Maybe the strategic leaders, the ones who have got this rich inner world, might be better. So they can still be leading organization, but a lot more strategic rather than kind of being sales related or something like that. Or I wouldn't even be surprised if introverts could be good from a sales perspective too. It'd be very different. Let's say it wouldn't be necessarily the gift of the gab, talking here and there or whatever, but maybe, back to the empathy thing, going to these sales meetings, one-on-one meetings, but actually really trying to understand what the client actually needs. Potentially, that could be a really good job for an introvert, like that deep connection in these situations. So yeah, I would say, there's definitely many times that I've been very jealous of people's ability to be crazy charismatic. And, I quite frequently wonder how on earth they know what to talk about for such long periods of time. And like you said with your husband, like, how on earth do you always have something to say to somebody when I'm barely even thinking myself? But, I think there are a lot of skills that introverts have. And I do think that, I don't know if the workplace, this is the struggle I sometimes have is sometimes I find myself resenting the situation, resenting the team, the workplace, the environment, because of there's not enough. It's not designed enough for introverts, and I don't know if that's me. If it's me kind of giving up power in some ways, like I'm kind of taking away responsibility for the situation. Like, oh, it's you guys, it's your fault that I'm not being seen and heard, and if that's the case, that's not good because nothing's going to change, right? So that's the bit I'm still wrestling with. Is like, okay, if there are situations in the workplace, in life in general, where introverts aren't necessarily served well, I can give up responsibility and blame everybody else, or I can try to do something about it. And that's what I'm trying to do. Like I'm trying to be proactive in creating situations where I do thrive, building relationships in smaller groups because I find it a lot easier to do. But yeah, it's definitely something have wrestled with and continue to wrestle with.
And I think we have scripts. We've seen this in films, and like we've seen this so many times. How a person like the cliches of, especially for certain roles, how that role is supposed to be executed. Like you talk about salespeople. It's really hard to imagine an introvert salesperson. Although empathy it can be a big plus. I'm thinking, like, for example, I found myself directing a film, but being a director, it's like it felt like I'm crossing some line. It's like this kind of thing is not for me. And I think maybe if I understood that, like, I don't have to be the director that I know from, like, previous examples. I can like inhabit this role in the way that is true to who I am. Like maybe a director can be ambivalent. Maybe a director can be so soft spoken. And it's very hard. It's very hard to do. It takes courage, I think.
Definitely, and I think that's one of the core things. Is like it's important to find your way because you're right. We're exposed to like the successes of maybe the more extroverted people, more extroverted directors or salespeople. And if we're trying to compare ourselves to that, of course we're going to fail and be full of self-loathing, for example. But I think it is important to do it your way, like to know your principles, to know what you're trying to achieve, to believe in yourself that actually what you're trying to achieve is worth it, and the way you're going to do it is a good way to do it. So I think that's exactly what I'm trying to do as well. Like I also have had doubts about many different things, but you just got to, take a path, take a stand, and try and see what happens, basically. And it does start to make you reframe it, like, oh shit, these things, which I've considered my weaknesses because I've compared it to X, Y, and Z. Actually, they're my strengths.
Do you think we can stretch our introvert boundaries, and should we?
Yeah, I think we can to an extent. Like, I mean, in my life, it's not quite introversion, but I was incredibly shy as a child, like incredibly shy. And I'd be on the outside of social situations looking in, and um, and yeah, like that wasn't a shyness. I was scared to participate. I was scared to be in the arena talking to people. I was always just the one on the outside watching in. And I learned through my childhood, through my teenage years, to kind of function more and be less shy. In particular, we've mentioned it already, people pleasing help with that. And I think my first kind of leaning into socializing was people pleasing. And I've slowly kind of leaning out of that again too, because I learned that can have its own problems. So I think it's definitely, a level that we can adapt our introversion a little bit. And I think a lot of it comes down to just leaning into the strengths. It's not it's not something to, it's just something to be embraced and something to be lived for the full, I think. Like, there are so many great points about being an introvert. It's basically anything, right? Any self-development, there's always a boundary of like, how much should I try to change, and how much of it is just like avoiding, trying to avoid, and how much is it just to sell self-development books eventually? Like, if everyone's always trying to change, there's always going to be new self-development books to be sold. So I think it's a little bit like that. Like, there is a level we should all want to get better at life in general. And if as an introvert you're feeling like you're held back because you're finding it difficult to make relationships, okay, well, take that part of your struggles and analyze it and think, okay, well, how can you improve this? Is it finding better places to find these relationships? Is it kind of trying to build your confidence? And what is the way to do that? Is it a therapist? Is it like pushing yourself at your comfort zone? So I think we can be very analytical about it like that, rather than looking at plainly as like, oh, introvert or not. Like, okay, what is it about being an introvert or being a human being in general right now that you're struggling with that's holding you back from certain situations? And like, what can you do now to kind of change that, to kind of get out of that situation? Does that make sense?
Yes, and I really liked what you said before too about the work situation where instead of feeling defeated about, oh, this is how the world is, this is how they do things, maybe you can actually take some initiative or just make a contribution to slightly changing the way things are done and adjusting it to people
Absolutely.
who are more like you.
And hopefully, hopefully if we get, we mentioned introverted leaders too. Like, if we can get, as introverts, if we do get into leadership positions, either in the workplace or organizations, we can be these people who are a little bit more conscious about, okay, there could be people here right now who aren't speaking, but have got something really interesting to say. So I think, and this is one of these things, I don't know if we should and can try to penetrate other workplaces to offer like, trainings, because there are employees out there with stuff to say but who aren't maybe getting the chance to say them right now. Or if it's up to us to kind of, to say fight for these positions, to get into this position ourselves, and then kind of like make this change. Again, it's not a drastic change. I think sometimes we forget that just because people aren't saying something right now does not mean that they haven't got a really interesting contribution to add in the right environment, let's say.
Right, so true. And it goes back to empathy. And I'm glad that you have it. I usually feel like I'm so busy just like surviving in some situations that I sometimes forget to read the room or to kind of see what an individual person is struggling with. Do you have any, last thoughts or advice for people about introversion or dealing with introverts?
I mean, I would say, I don't know who would need to hear this, but like, if you are an introvert out there, and maybe you don't feel like this, but like me, if you are kind of self-loathing after these events and things, thinking, oh, I'm rubbish, this wasn't good, I never connect with people, I would just say, like, it's not true. There are so many people out there you can connect with, and it's just important to put yourself in the right positions. Like, it's a really silly kind of obvious thought comes to mind, but a fish out of water is going to suck at being a fish, right? It's going to die eventually. And it's the same with us. Like, if we're in positions where we're not going to thrive, then of course we're going to come away feeling bad. So definitely seek out opportunities to meet people in ways that suit you. And if they don't exist, make them, because that's the key thing. Like, sometimes we feel a bit helpless, like, oh, nothing exists, I'm rubbish, I'm just going to shut up and be by myself. No, you can make cool stuff. And in fact, as we've discussed earlier, introverts can make incredibly good leaders from the empathy perspective, from the, like you said, even being a solo role, kind of trying to lead something. So, if something doesn't exist, create it and build your social circles yourself. But yeah, I think that's kind of how I'd leave it. Like, we are Introvert Social Club. We are going to be expanding. So if this even resonates with you and you think, oh, I could bring this to my city, get in touch. Like, yeah, the website is introverts-social.club. So you can get me there. But no, I'll probably leave that as my last final words, I think.
That's a great idea, actually, and I would love to see this community internationally. It would be nice to see to know that wherever I go, I can find people to connect with. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been so interesting, and I will see you at the next meetup, I think.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. It's been really cool to chat, and yeah, I've enjoyed the discussion a lot.